Just want to say hello to the fam. This is King Sigma going live August 8th, 2019. Such a beautiful summer day out. Hope everyone is enjoying their August. As you guys know, we're in the last 30 days of summer. I'm trying my best to enjoy this weather and do some of the things that I have been holding off on doing. But I decided to check in so that I can experiment with Streamlabs. I didn't intend on doing it live for another 2 weeks, but I don't want to fall too far behind with the current technology that's being used to do live cast and whatnot. Eventually, I'll have to learn Streamlabs and some of the other video editing software so I can do more of a podcast format, but I actually enjoy the live cast format because it's more of a impromptu freestyle type of thing, and that's always been my nature. I enjoy freestyle type of conversations. So that's why I'm doing a live cast today. Today I'll be discussing the Black American ADOS lineage movement and how that relates to the relationship with Pan-Africanism and Black diasporans here in the United States. I wanted to start off with a quote that's very relevant to this issue. We have a lot of free-thinking Black men in this space. A lot of you guys are big into history, politics, and economics, and that's really what this ADOS Black lineage movement versus the Black diaspora and Pan-African movement is really about. It's something that's new for this age in terms of the last 60 years. Black Americans as a voting bloc, as a certain population, is not monolithic, but we do know that what matters is what the majority of voters are doing. What you and I may do as individual voters that's not necessarily a voting bloc unless you're rich or united with other rich people. What matters is what large voting blocs do, what rich people do, and what rich people united as a voting bloc do. Those are the most important groups in America. So when we talk about the ADOS lineage movement, we're talking about a voting bloc that has existed and that has, for the last 60 years, for the most part, swung their support behind Democratic Party agendas or whatnot. But as we saw in 2016, that began to change in terms of the Black male vote specifically. And that's what we're concerned about in these spaces, is what's going on with free-thinking Black men. I talk a lot about my fixed by exit plan and how I believe that that's going to, really be the solution at the end of the day for most free-thinking Black men. But in regards to that, a quote that stuck out to me today was something I had read in my research on the Civil War, the beginning of the reparations movement, and how all that relates to the descendants of American slave movement that's starting to take off in 2019. I mean, we had a Democratic candidate for the first time, any politician since the Civil War Reconstruction era, talking about reparations before a voting audience. And back at the time when he talked about reparations during Reconstruction, I mean, that was something that, that was talked about maybe in a newspaper, but for a Democratic candidate, Marianne Williamson, to come out on television and say, this is a debt owed and I support it, that was a watershed moment, because once that happened, that set a national precedent for discussion. And that's going to be an important piece for getting that massive Black voting bloc to support you. So it's on the platform going forward, you might as well say. And I'm going to get a little bit more into that later. But, this whole thing really started with the Civil War officer and general by the name of William T. Sherman. Many of you may have heard about him because of Sherman's March. It was really him, William Sherman, and Ulysses Grant that really put an end to the Confederate uprising of the Southern states back in the during the Civil War times, or what I call the Uncivil War. But he said something that when he was asked by a newspaper about his thoughts on the war and about the Confederates in rebellion and their treasonous action, he said that war is the remedy that our enemies have chosen. And I say, let us give them all they want. And I thought that was such a powerful quote because, this is the guy who issued Special Order 15. And for you all that are newer to this conversation and may have never heard of it, Special Order 15 was where the 40 acres and a mule's claim began. Because back in those times, they had been giving the freed, what they called contraband blacks at that time, the land that was the former slaveholders' owners. So the slaveholders that ran from the Union, or they were fighting against the Union. And so the land was left. And so when those Union soldiers would come down there, they had to make a decision on what they were going to do with what they called at that time contraband, which was the land, the property, and the black enslaved themselves. And some of the more forward thinking Union soldiers, like a William Sherman, believed that they should, these are the people that have been tending to the land, these black enslaved Africans. So they should be the ones that continue to tend to the land. And he wanted to give that land to him. And he was what they called a radical Republican at that time, whereas Abraham Lincoln and his would-be vice president, Andrew Johnson, who would become the president of the United States, later to go on and be impeached, they were what you would call Lincoln would have been what you call a moderate Republican at that time, and his vice president, Andrew Johnson, would have been what you called a conservative, borderline Confederate. So they called him a conservative Republican at that time, but he was really a Democrat, which was the slave party at that time, would have been the Democrats. And he was from Tennessee. So he was what they called a border state politician. And that's one of the reasons that Lincoln brought him on. So some of the more radical Republicans, they wanted to give these blacks the land, they wanted to give them cash, and they wanted to bring the Confederates themselves, the officers, Robert E. Lee, they wanted to do their own version of a Reconstruction Nuremberg, because those men were traitors to the Union. And so based on the laws of war, they all should have been hung and executed by the state. But Lincoln and some of the more moderate conservative Republicans thought that it would be best to bring them back into the Union, and that it would be better for the country overall. So that was a decision they made. But William Tecumseh Sherman was not one of those. He didn't have any love for Confederates. He had no problem destroying the land and property as he saw fit to bring the war to an end, because he just really believed that once you made that decision to go to war, scorched earth was the best policy. And I chose this quote because I was having a conversation with the brother Edward Anderson, and he kind of sparked this whole ADOS versus Black Diaspora conversation because of a live cast that he did, but he pulled it down between himself. It was an issue between himself and Mike V. So, you know, the brother Edward Anderson is a Black American, whereas the brother Mike V is a Bayesian Caribbean American. So they fall on different sides of this whole conversation. So that kind of sparked it. And one of the things that Edward has said is that he's all for a scorched earth policy. Me being the centrist that I am, I'm more in the middle, as I usually am on these kind of issues. But at the same time, being a Black American, descendant of American slaves, I mean, you know, I'm definitely going to have a problem with anyone that decides to go against what I consider the continuation of the civil rights movement, because the civil rights movement was unfinished business, right? Because the Black Americans at that time, the GI generation and the silent generation, they were under such a brutal system, and it was a legal system, that they felt the focus should be on dealing with the legal status of Black Americans and then taking care of the economic and political later. So my contention has been that that those two generations, the GI and the silents, did a great job of taking care of the legal status. We, you know, with the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and affirmative action or whatever, that was supposed to take care of the legal questions about what is the status of the Black American. So the boomer generation and the Gen Xers, they were supposed to continue the economic portion of that movement. But we know that the boomers got more focused on money, and the older Gen Xers as well. And so what we see now with this ADOS lineage movement is a reclamation of the status part, but also with a focus on the economic part as well. And that's being led by younger Gen Xers and millennials, right? But the younger Gen Xers are playing a big role. So, you know, your younger Gen Xers would be those that are under 45, like they're in the 40 to 45, 40 to 47 kind of range. Those are your younger Gen Xers. And being with the millennials being under 38 to 20. So that's the 22 to 38 or so age range. And they're the ones that are really backing this. So I think what's going on here, as I listen to the conversation that Edward Anderson was having and Mike V was in the comments section, there seems to be some confusion about what xenophobia is, if xenophobia is good, if xenophobia is bad. And so my belief, based on, you know, just what my understanding of xenophobia is, and I'm not talking about what they tell you in the headlines of the news and the mass media, because we often misuse words. And so the media, when they talk about xenophobia, they talk about hatred of foreigners, right? So they're selling this idea that Trump and his supporters are xenophobes, they're nativists, they hate. They tell you that xenophobia means to hate foreigners, but that's actually not what xenophobia means. The actual conventional definition of xenophobia is to have a fear of foreigners, not a hatred, a fear. And if you want to get more specific in the definition, it's about, I was reading the most oldest definition of, xenophobia, and it said that a state of being afraid, uneasiness caused by possible danger. And it's important that we that want to call ourselves free-thinking Black men, that we fall in love with linguistics, that we fall in love with the etymology of words, and then we're always able to revert back to the foundation and the structure of how language is used versus how it's manipulated by the ruling elites and others for their own selfish reasons. So that second clause is the part that is so important to me, where it says uneasiness caused by possible danger. And in my book, you should always be alert of possible dangers. That's called awareness. So what you have, the reason that this conflict and this tension is growing between ADOS Black Americans and the Black diasporans is because for the last 60 years, Black Americans under the boomer generation and the older Gen Xers, they were a very egalitarian group. They didn't see any possible danger of opening up their political agenda to outside Blacks, outside of the American jurisdiction. Because as you know, about 90% of what we call Black diasporans, they came into the United States after 1980. So they actually were flooded in during the time that crack was about to take off in America, during the Reaganomics era. So Blacks had a lot going on at that time in terms of, the crack era, Reaganomics. Globalization was just really starting to pick up around that time. You had a lot of cities in America that had been industrial epicenters. They were beginning to move their companies to other countries, and this was causing massive layoffs. So it was a lot going on. But at the time, the politicians began to bring in all of these Black diasporans to America. And because the Blacks that were politically at the political age at that time were focused on these other things, they kind of lost track of the impact of bringing in these Black diasporans, and they didn't see it as a danger. In fact, they were very welcoming, because for Black Americans, they had, for the most part, been in this country struggling with the dominant white society on their own up until the 1970s or so, when they started to reform the immigration acts and to bring in these Black diasporans. So they were very welcoming to these people. But what happened is that, hindsight is always going to be 20/20. And that's why I don't go too hard on the boomers, is, because, hey, they thought they had a different priority at that time that they thought was important. They thought that, because at that time, affirmative action was actually going to Black Americans at that time, the 70s up into the early 80s, they were getting affirmative action. So they were focused on getting those corporate and those government jobs at that time. For a lot of Blacks, this was like the biggest, opportunity they ever seen for a lot of these Black Americans to like go into corporations, go into government jobs. So a lot of them were focused on taking advantage of that and other things and other problems that were plaguing Black America at the time. So I don't go too hard on boomers on that, because each generation has to account for its wise decisions and its bad decisions. But unfortunately, it's been left to the younger Gen Xers, the millennials, because the millennials are becoming are coming of age now, where the older ones are getting into their late 30s now, and the younger ones are finishing up college, and those are going to be the ones that bring about the most change. So what's going on is that because diasporans, Blacks, have been here for about 40 years, the lion's share of them, they have become comfortable with a very passive Black American politics. So I use the term passive because it's been very much laissez-faire and hands-off, non-aggressive for Black Americans. And that has, now they're paying the cost of that because they were in such a slumber and a passive state over the last 40 years. They've allowed certain things to happen that now they find themselves afraid. And that's why they're throwing up their defense now, because, I mean, I've talked before about the impact of illegal immigration on Black American men specifically. And, you know, I don't got to tell you, they just did an ICE raid yesterday down in Mississippi. I know I've talked to brothers before about the Chicago Clover Hill raid that happened last year and the impact that had on Black American unemployed males in that area. Immediately, because of that raid, they had to hire, I think, like 500 for the Clover Hill Bakery situation to keep that contract with McDonald's. I think it was about 500. And they had to pay those workers $5 more than what they were paying illegal immigrants, also with benefits. And it was immediate, because if they didn't get those positions filled, they would have lost those contracts with, I believe it was McDonald's and Burger King, but it was for sure McDonald's. So I remember to mention that. And so what we see is that cause and effect here. And so with the raid in Mississippi, those U.S. immigration customs enforcement agents, they arrested damn near 700 illegal aliens. And these was in the poultry industry. So that's 700 illegal alien jobs that will now go to some 700 unemployed Black men. And that stuff is very important, because too often we forget that Black Americans have been more dominated by their blue collar and working class up until the last decade. So whereas a lot of the brothers that may tend to come to this space tend to be higher blue collar workers or white collar workers, do not lose sight of the fact that most of your brothers out here are unskilled workers or lower level blue collar workers. So you cannot overlook that, because they represent about half of our numbers. So it's important that those kind of opportunities go to them. So if someone wants to call me xenophobic for saying that I'm Black, Native Blacks first, then go ahead and call me xenophobic. But all you're saying is that I have a healthy fear of possible danger from immigrants coming to this country. So a healthy fear is a good thing, in my opinion. And anyone that would ask you not to is someone that's looking to get something and take advantage of you. So that's basically what xenophobia happens to be. And I kind of wanted to, segue that to, let me take a break and check the chat. Cause like when I get to having my conversations, I really don't, check the chat. So I just want to, shout out to everybody. I see Mr. Fantastic. Let me see who's all in here. Just shout out to everyone, man. But I just want to kind of look and see who's in here. I see Mr. Fantastic drop through. Man of Tomorrow, Siova, Mike V. Shout out to Mike V. Mike V, I sent you the link if you have time. I know it was kind of a spur of the moment thing, but because of that conversation with you and Edward Anderson, I wanted to have you two on for sure. And if you guys can't come in, I'll try to open up the panel to some other guys. If y'all want to talk about the conversation, I'll probably go for another 30 minutes. L. Simpson, Ifone, Abdullah, Ben Bobby, Johnny Mills. Shout out to all y'all, man. Complex. So, Tony Smith, Supreme King Coon, shout out, salute, daps to everybody. So we're getting back to the topic. So when we talk about the rising ADOS lineage movement versus the Diaspora, we're really talking about what the silence and the boomers specifically, because from my understanding, the silence and the boomers were really big on pushing Pan-Africanism. And like I said, lots of things sound good, in theory, lots of things sound good. And the kind of, basically, for those that are not aware of what Pan-Africanism is, it's a worldwide movement that aims to encourage and strengthen bonds of solidarity between all indigenous and diasporic ethnic groups of African descent. That is a worthy goal. And I will never say that it's not a goal, and it should be a long-term goal. Even if in the short term and in the midterm, we have to kind of close ranks. And the reason that I made the statement that I made about William T. Sherman and his quote. And for those that just joined, I'll read that quote again. And this is from the Union Civil War General William Sherman. And he was the one that issued Special Order 15 and started this whole reparation conversation, a white man, I believe from Ohio. He said that war is the remedy that our enemies have chosen. And I say, let us give them all they want. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because for me, I'm a person who considers myself to be more of a left libertarian, centrist, moderate. I have a lot of conflicting views in the mind of people that can't hold two thoughts at one time, because I think one thing on one issue and a conservative stance on another issue, a liberal stance, and I might even have an anarchist stance on another issue. So, but for me, when it comes to this reparation issue that has resurfaced and it's actually gone mainstream now, I think of a sleeping giant has been awakened in Black America. And I really, truly do feel that. Hey, shout out to you too, Game Changer, man. I love what you're doing on your channel and the conversation you're having, man. Keep doing what you're doing over there. But for me, I consider it to be that there's a sleeping giant in Black America, because as much as we want to ignore Black Americans, I gotta just really point out something to people. We talk a lot about data over here and really having your facts in order. And based on the 2010 census, there are about 37 million ADOS Blacks in America, in comparison to only 2.6 million Blacks from African nations and about 1.2 million Black Hispanics. And then those that would be other kinds of diasporan Blacks is less than like 500,000 or so. So we're talking about a total diaspora population of 4 million versus a ADOS population of 37 million. And I just want to just a moment of silence on that for once, so you guys can think about that. 37 million ADOS Black Americans, 4 million diaspora Black Americans. So when we're having these conversations, we really need to be very careful about being realistic. Because, like I said earlier, the American political process works based on voting blocks and wealth, right? So obviously, in America, the wealthiest groups of individuals have the most influence on political policy. It's just that simple. Legal policy, political policy, economic policy, it's individual rich people. It's been proven. Then the more powerful group than even them would be rich people united as a voting bloc. They're the most dangerous to all of us, because they can get whatever they want. They literally own Washington, D.C. and the politicians and the Supreme Court. And you can verify that just by checking the background on most of your Supreme Court justices. Most of them come from some of the most immoral and unethical corporations in America. Like I know that Clarence Thomas and a couple of the other ones, they came from Monsanto, right? And we know what the kind of stuff that they're into all across the world as a multinational corporation. So, you know, with the situation that we're in, Black Americans as a united group, and I don't mean as a monolithic group, I mean as like what is considered the voting blocks as you break it down. So if we look at the 2016 numbers, about 15% of Black American men voted for the Republican Party, and about 7% for third party, and 80% for the Democratic Party, right? And you all know that I've made the prediction. I think that those numbers are going to be drastically different in 2020. And it's not going to be good for the Democrats. So the Democrats have to figure out, well, if the Black men are the swing voters, because a case can be made that the Black male is now the swing voter, how do we bring them back to this conversation? And for all the Black men that I've talked to, the only thing that's going to bring them back is a big ass check, literally. And that's how politics work, quid pro quo. If you want my voting block vote and you want me to use my voice to influence other Black men to vote for you, I want a check, because everything else has not worked for the at-large populations. And what's right for 1% versus 10% versus 50 to 60 is totally different, because what will happen is that what's right for 1% will be the loudest voice, but that's not what's going to impact the larger 60% that makes up the voting block. So for me, I think that the Democrats will have a hard time getting 60% of the vote this time. based on what I've seen in the digital world, at least, and having conversation with very thoughtful brothers, I could see Donald Trump getting about 25% of the black vote. And I think third parties will go about 10%. But as I said before, the biggest story of 2020 will be the protest vote and the lack of black men saying, I don't care about voting because it has no bearing on me. And it's hard for the Democrats to make a case that they haven't totally exercised a benign neglect policy on black American males. I've been keeping track. In the first debate so far, every group under their umbrella has been mentioned. But guess what? The black American has not been mentioned. He hasn't been mentioned at all. Not one time have they made reference to the black male voting bloc. They've made reference to feminists, to the Rainbow Coalition, to illegals speaking Spanish, and to the soy boy, millennial white male type groups. But as far as speaking directly to black males, nothing, because they know that 90% of their platform it goes against the basic interest of black men. Like I said, most black men are in the working class. And though they may be, some of them, a percentage may be involved in the unions, many of these black men that are in the working class are contract workers, temporary workers, part-time workers, unskilled workers. So the open borders, illegal immigration being 50% of their platform right now goes against them. So they've kind of felt that we're going to ignore black men and try to seduce the female and get the black men to follow behind her. But anyone just looking at the 2016 numbers would know that that's not going to work this time around. This, what we call red pill, what we call the manosphere community, this thing has spread exponentially since 2016. And I can speak for that because I didn't even know about this space until last year. I became aware of this space of black thinking men only in winter of 2018. So it was already taken off during that last term of Barack Obama, talking to some of the older gentlemen in this space, that this thing has been, you know, Black Manosphere 1.0 was 2008 to 2015. And what arose in the second half of 2015 to 2019, that expanded it. And now we're going, you know, 2020 will be going into the 3.0 as the Silicon Valley digital media censorship campaign picks up. It's really picking up right now. I mean, they're not flagging people and warning them anymore. They're deleting and terminating channels based on their arbitrary hate speech policy, which is to be expected because this is a third-party platform. But they're not going to be able to stop these conversations because there's other platforms out there like Black Avenger, Slaying Evil, Expat Kings, Dominique Mag. And there's other people starting to put up blogs as well. So it's growing. And they're going to have to really, really come with something special to get those black males to vote that way. Because I think that, to be honest, it wouldn't shock me if the majority of black males don't even vote in 2020. It's that bad right now. So that could happen. So I'm going to go ahead and get back to this, this ADOS versus Black Americans thing. So for me, I've always had a good relationships with immigrants, specifically immigrant Black people, what I call Black diasporans. I've had quite a few relationships with immigrant women, and they've been very good to me. And the Black diasporan brothers that I've run into, they've been cool. Because what I found with a lot of the Black diasporans, especially the ones that just get over here, they have a lot of stereotypical views of Black Americans. But once they actually get to know you as an individual, all that goes out the window. So that's my own personal relationship with Black diasporans. It's been a very positive one. And even if it comes down to a situation where in the short term, we have to be opposed to each other, that's okay, because I think that long term we'll end up we have to go through this lineage process in order for us to continue the conversation about Pan-Africanism, because our Black diasporan brothers and sisters have to be called out on their bullshit. And I'm serious about that. A lot of our Black diasporan people have actually been betrayed the Black American ADOS. And I'm going to go deep into that right now. And so I've met the good ones. I've met the ones that really come with an open mind and they judge you as a thinking Black man. But you got to understand a lot of these people get their information from the media and from lies and from rumors that spread to them while they're in other countries. They come here, and a lot of them are put in situations where they run into the black redneck representative. I don't got to go into much detail about who the black redneck is and what they stand for and their low vibration and their low image and how that has a negative impact on us all. So, you know, that's why we have these spaces, because we're fighting back against that by showing that black men will stick to the information, black men will stick to the data, and black men will always recognize when their opinion is an opinion, and we'll have those discussions in the most civil way that we possibly can. So the reason I say that a lot of our black diasporan people have betrayed us is because, as I said earlier, if the fundamental goal of Pan-Africanism was to create a worldwide movement that encouraged and strengthened the bonds of blacks all across the country, that has been a complete failure for the most part over the last 60 years. It's been a one-way street. So based on me being an older millennial man, I would say that when I hear the term Pan-Africanism, to me, if I was to make a symbol of it, of what it means in my mind, I would picture a black carpet and a black stool and black diasporans stepping on that carpet, then stepping on them stools to make themselves, put themselves in a better position in America at the expense of black Americans. And the reason I say this is because I don't see a two-way street going on in the black diaspora. Here we are. I told you this started about the 80s, so we're 40 years in. Where's the two-way street as far as benefits? Because again, we're talking politics now. We're talking Machiavellian politics now. So you guys that are uncomfortable talking about Machiavellian politics, this is not going to be a good next couple of years for you, because like I said, this 2020 cycle is not the end all of what's going to happen, because now that this lineage movement is picking up now, and because of the developing black agenda, a lot of blacks may even take this election off. So this thing can get pushed from 2020 to 2024 to 2028. So we're looking at a 10-year situation. So, I mean, if we're talking about two-way streets, let's just talk about something. I'll just pick a topic. Okay. Foreign aid welfare. Foreign aid welfare, right? So that came to my mind because Donald Trump was recently in the news talking about foreign aid. And I'll go ahead and read for you guys because I don't know the whole sharing function yet. And I don't want to mess up the stream by sharing it on StreamYard, but I'll just read it for you. So this was an article earlier in the year where President Donald Trump said that countries that receive foreign aid do nothing for us. And he says that he had his OMB office, State Department, and everyone to crunch the numbers. And he says that, you know, all this foreign aid that they're sending out, that they're not getting anything in return. And since the 1980s, the foreign aid welfare budget has been about $50 to $60 billion. And Trump is saying that he wants to cut it because he's focused on immigration reform. That's his whole thing. So he had his cabinet and his secretaries do the research, and he came to the conclusion that foreign aid does nothing for the general America. Just think about that for a minute. So I'm going to base my conversation in what Donald Trump said. He's the president of the United States. He's the head of state. He's the head of foreign policy. In fact, within the American context, other agencies and other sectors often, they just take a laissez-faire approach to foreign policy, and they allow the executive to focus on that. So for your president to come out and say, our foreign aid welfare program is a failure, that's huge for me, because he's talking about America at large. Now, as I said, on average, the federal budget for foreign aid welfare is about $55 billion every year, right? And a lion's share that goes to states like Israel. So doing the research, you come to find out about $20 billion is set aside. Now, this is just for the United States now with this foreign aid welfare. Other nations do give welfare to these countries as well. But I'm only focused on the United States in that context of the ADOS. So they get about $20 billion, right? $20 billion. And, you know, I'm not going to give you guys every nation in the diaspora's numbers that they get, but I can give you some of the more popular countries. But I do have a spreadsheet that I created where I went through the budget and I looked at what each country gets, because this is going to be important as we see more Black diasporans put themselves on the track, as that train, that bullet train, gets stronger and stronger and it starts to pick up speed. Unfortunately, there are going to be more and more Black diasporans that place themselves on a track that has nothing to do with them. This battle is really a battle between ADOS Black Americans that are concerned about it, because as I said earlier, Black Americans are not a monolithic group. A quarter of Black American men, for sure, they're in the conservative group. Another group is, they don't care at all, but a massive amount of the voting bloc cares about that. So that's why it's relevant. This is an issue between the United States government, state governments, United States corporations, the United Nations, Great Britain, Spain, and other governments. That's who this fight is. It has nothing to do with Black diasporans at all. In fact, Black diasporans through CARICOM actually have their own movement for reparations going on right now. The 22 United Nations of the Caribbean bloc. And I'm all for that. I support my Black brothers and sisters of the Caribbean in their claims against those nations, like the French, who have had Haiti under like a very draconian reparations to them program, where they've been stealing money from Haiti because they lost that war. I 100% support that. And I would never put myself in the way between their claim and France, their claim, Jamaicans' claim against Great Britain, South African claims against the Dutch. I would never place myself, just from a logical and a practical reason. I just wouldn't do it. So it's very ironic to me that though I consider as a Black descendant of American slave, that I would never do that. You have Black diasporans doing it. Now, I understand a certain segment of the population that are these Black diasporans because they are being paid to do so through different think tanks, through different multinationals to do what they're doing. But I can understand why they're doing it, because they're getting a check to do it. But a lot of these other Black diasporans, I can't understand it. So I had to go into the history, like, why are they doing this, right? Like, why are they putting themselves in the way of a speeding bullet train? They're sacrificing themselves for nothing. They have nothing to gain long term, because you're not going to stop a 37 million people voting bloc. I'm a moderate, a centrist, heavily leans libertarian, and I support it. So if you can get someone like me to support some of these Hotep communists, and some of the more democratic people and some of the conservatives are all saying, you know, I'm all for this reparations, that should kind of make a free-thinking diasporan think, you know what, I need to step away from this conversation and find out how I can be an ally to these people. And if I'm not going to be an ally, I should be at least indifferent and focus on what is going on in my nation. So as I was listening to Donald Trump's speech, and I was looking at some of the white papers that came out of that, his claim that foreign aid does not benefit America at all, that's when I said, wow, that's when this whole thing popped off with the ADOS versus Black diasporans. And for those that don't know how it actually really took off, it was because of Kamala Harris. So she's the powder keg that really kicked off this whole ADOS versus the Black diaspora, because she was disingenuous when she called herself an African American, knowing that the ADOS was telling her, no, you should go by what you've always gone by. She's always called herself a biracial. And that was very similar to Barack Obama, but we didn't have the digital media army that we have now. That's why Barack Obama had a more difficult time in 2012, because Blacks themselves, like Tavis Smiley, Cornel West, started to speak out against the fact that Barack Obama was doing nothing for the rank and file Black Americans. And so the digital thing really spread from 2012 onward. So she thought that she was going to be able to play the same card and strategy that Barack Obama played, but it's really blown up in her face. So as you guys all know, the new polls come out. The polls come out like every Tuesday and every Friday. That's when the most important polls come out. I don't put a lot of weight on polls. It's more like a temperature test, because no one knows what happens. But Kamala Harris is tanking in the polls now, right? So she was a top tier candidate. A month ago, she was polling at 20%. Now she's polling at 6%, and she's polling at 1% amongst Black American ADOS voters. This was unexpected because she was put up there by the corporate third way Democrat think tank. They are the ones that was pushing her. They're the same ones that are pushing Joe Biden. So if you understand third way Democrats, they're controlled by corporate banks, basically, but they call themselves Democrats, whatnot. So they're very conservative on economic policies, but they still try to push these social engineering narratives, but for different reasons than those that are on the right wing. So as the brother Ulysses just pointed out, let me see. I think that I can highlight comments. So let me see, because I saw that Ulysses was just like took the words what I was just about to say about Kamala Harris. So yeah, here we go. So yeah, Kamala Harris, she had always called herself a biracial. And Barack Obama, we know from his history that he not only considered him a biracial, but he had no connection whatsoever to Black Americans. I mean, at all, until he met Michelle Obama. He was going to marry a white woman, but he was rejected twice by white women. They rejected his proposal. And he just happened to meet Michelle Obama. And that was the first and only Black American woman that he ever dated. I've heard different conversation pieces on, you know, if it was a political thing or whatnot, but whatever. They got married. He became the first biracial parent, and she became the first Black American first lady. That's reality. But I feel that was a once in a lifetime thing. Even Donald Trump himself said it. He said that there won't be another Black American president for a long time. Now, I don't agree with him on that. There could be another Black American president tomorrow. But I understand the sentiment, what he was saying. He was trying to use it as an example to say that Barack Obama was a failure to Black Americans, which is true. And I'm a Donald Trump supporter. I would actually say I'm indifferent to Donald Trump for the most part. I'm mostly indifferent to him. So, you know, you had the situation with Kamala Harris. So she's a daughter of a Jamaican father and a Hindu Indian mother. And I mean, her story is very confusing. Like, she spent most of her developmental years in Canada. Then she like went to an HBCU. So, you know, when you're talking about a lot of these elite politicians, there'd be a lot of like machinations going on behind the scenes. A lot of this should be CIA stories. So who knows? But that's the story that we have. But what was interesting about Kamala Harris is that she never considered herself Black either. She always defined herself as biracial. And as we know, she's married to a Jewish American man. But her own father attacked her. You guys can Google it. But her father attacked her, man, because he said that she's a liar. This is her biological father, that she's a bad representative of Jamaica, and that she's given Jamaicans a bad name, all because she's greedy for political power. You guys can go search that. Kamala Harris's father rejects her. Go ahead and search that yourself. So she was raised by a Jamaican father and a Hindu mother, which there's nothing wrong with that. Matter of fact, I just ran into a Sri Lankan woman, and she was very cool. Gave me her phone number and everything. She's from Sri Lanka. I ain't never met a woman from Sri Lanka, but she was telling me all about Sri Lanka, and I didn't know that Sri Lanka, you know, so it's happened. You know, the intermixing is going to happen, but people got to keep it a buck as far as where their loyalties lie and what their agenda is. So her own father just totally rejected her on that lie that she was a Black American. She's never been a Black American. She thought it would be convenient to call herself Black American, but unfortunately, she ran into a new generation of Black men and women. I'm sorry, especially Black men. They're not going for it no more. So you had the situation in the second debate, as Ulysses pointed out, where, you know, she had been prompted to answer a couple, like, you know, softball questions by the moderators, but then Tulsi Gabbard just hit her. I mean, she gave her such a KO. Ulysses used the term nuked. And it was such a KO. It reminded me of what happened to Marco Rubio back in 2016 against Trump. I don't know if you guys remember, man, but there was this moment during the 2016 debates where Donald Trump KO'd Mark Rubio in the very same way, but it was like Mark Rubio was like a robot, and they started calling him Mark Robot because he malfunctioned on stage and started repeating the same sentence over and over. And it was so sad that the moderators had to switch off of him because he was literally saying the same sentence over and over because he was so stunned by the attack from Donald Trump on his record. Because this PC thing has always been part of the game, is like, be nice to your opponent. But Donald Trump, he's very much iron fisted without the velvet glove. That's his mentality, right? So he KO'd Rubio. And I mean, Rubio dropped out like 30 days later. He just malfunctioned, man. So when I saw, and you guys can go look at the replay of the Tulsi Gabbard exchange, and it was a very short exchange because the moderators, remember, CNN was one of the companies that was trying to promote Kamala Harris. So, but it happened too fast. They couldn't stop it. So she was going to go in even deeper into Kamala's record and really give her the final blow. But as these moderators do, they switched to another conversation and got her off the mic. But it was enough to destroy Kamala Harris's credibility. So she's gone from 20 in the polls down to 6, and she's down to 1% with black voters. So there you go. That strategy failed. So that's where this whole thing came from. So what happened is that because these mainstream media outlets, entertainment outlets, were trying to promote Kamala Harris, they began to attack the most visible faces of the ADOS lineage movement in the social media sphere. And that, to me, was a moment of weakness for the Democratic Party and the ruling elites, because if they have to come off from their mountaintop to deal with regular, everyday black people who they don't know if they're millions, 10 million, 20, they don't know how big or small this group is, for them to come down to start attacking them directly with their Democratic voices and pundits, that let me know that this movement strikes a lot of fear in those that would like to see the black Americans stuck in a black redneck culture. And that's why you see someone like the buffoon Bernie Sanders sitting down talking to a black Latino redneck female like Cardi B, even after she's been accused of all kind of crimes and admitted to all kind of numerous felonies, right? So they're just reaching. They're trying to figure out what is going on with these black Americans that are figuring out how to be politically savvy, that are starting to understand what political science is about, that are starting to understand that whether you get the black people that are voting based on traditional voting patterns of their grandparents, and then you got them being overtaken by this new group that are saying, you know what, I understand that my grandparents went through a lot to get the right to vote, but it's not just having the right to vote that matters, but what you do with that vote and what kind of what you get in exchange for your vote. And what younger Gen Xers and millennials in the aggregate are saying now is that we get nothing. We get nothing for our vote. And they're pretty much right from the Democrats, because like I said, Republicans don't need your vote anyway right now. So the Democrats, in order to win, they have to get the black vote, because they're not going to be able to bring in those 10 million illegal immigrants that they want to bring in while the Republicans are in power. So they have to go after the black vote. They already got the black female vote for the most part locked up at 95%. Now, I will say, I have noticed that there's a lot more black American women than I've ever heard starting to speak out against the Democratic Party as well. Now, that could mean that their numbers go down from 95% to like 90%. I don't know. We'll see. But I do know for a fact that black men's numbers supporting the Democratic Party is like half and half now. It really has gotten to that point for black men. So as these proxies and these pundits began to attack the ADOS movement through the social sphere, and now also on TV calling them bots, and I'm one of the more active black Americans on social media. I'm always sending out articles and attacking different politicians, whether they be conservatives, whether they be liberals. I attack everybody because I'm actually more of a political independent. So I just go by the issue at hand. And they were calling everyone bots. So that doesn't even make any sense to me, right? If you know that the black voter is your base, and for the most part, black men and black women have been voting hand in hand up until 2016, above 90%. And for you to attack your base, no one does that but an idiot. A short-sighted dummy does that. You don't attack your base. You can persuade your base. You can try to maneuver them to think a certain way, but you don't attack them and chastise your base. And that's what they began to do over the last 3 months. But it wasn't working. That's why you had Marianne Williamson come out on TV and say that I believe that the black American claim for reparations is legitimate, and I'm willing to start the negotiations at, she said trillions and trillions, but her numbers were all over the place. But anyone that's heard my Johnny Cochran plan understands that the number that the largest group of economists has come up with is 17 trillion. So the number is really between 10 and 17 trillion. That's the number. But her statement alone is enough that it set a precedent, and now it put the pressure on the other Democrats, because now you've raised the expectation of your base and your voting bloc. And more people are starting to speak out about this. So they began to call us bots. Anyone that said that Black Americans need an agenda, anyone that says that Blacks need to become more savvy about politics, they started to call us bots. They started to call us Russian agents, which I've always found very funny, because you got the cultural Marxist leftists calling free-thinking Black men, specifically Marxists, or that doesn't make any sense. Like, you're going to call them Russian communists, but you guys are the communists. Fucking Bernie Sanders is a communist. So they're calling the Black people communists when they're the communists, just like the Russians are. So this is the whole thing, like Russian bots. And you kind of saw that with Tulsi Gabbard after she KO'd Kamala. You can Google right now. The response from the Kamala Harris campaign was, she's a Russian bot. She's being paid by Assad. This is pathetic. This is how low the Democratic Party has sunken, that they're just pathetic. So this is the kind of smear that they've had against Black Americans. And me being a person that's spoken out about this, I refuse to be called a bot. I'm a real human being that has a voice, a vote, and a wallet. So I know that if they have to sink to that low of a attack against their own base, that just shows you the condition of the Democratic Party at large, and specifically why people are saying never Kamala. So that's where this whole, ADOS lineage versus the diasporan conversation kind of came from. And it kind of had stayed out of the Black manosphere. It was mostly in digital, Facebook, Twitter. It was mostly a conversation being had in that space. But it kind of got brought to the Black manosphere by Edward Anderson and Mike V in a conversation that they were having. So I don't know everything about what happened. I just chimed into the chat later on. But I did send a link to Mike V. He can let me know if he wants to come on in about 15 minutes or so, and I'll let you guys hear his version of it. So getting back to the xenophobia part, what I find funny is that it's insulting to the intelligence of Black people for Black diasporans to sit up here and call us xenophobes when we've been the most open borders group, the most in the Pan-African zeitgeist. We can prove it by the numbers. So they're saying that we're the xenophobes, but actually they've been the xenophobes. And so that forced me to do deeper research into what is the relationship between the African nations. Some people say that there are 32 nations. The United Nations includes 54 nations. So 32 to 54 African nations, right? What is the relationship between those nations and each other? That ends up being the question, because like if you're going to call us Black Americans xenophobes, well, then I got to make sure that you guys are not xenophobes. You're not just calling the kettle calling the handle black or whatnot. Well, come to find out, some of the African nations are the most xenophobic people that you could ever run across on the planet. They're actually worse than Trump supporters. Some of these Black nations treat each other worse than Trump treats illegals here. So doing my research on these different nations and their policies towards each other's, the tribalism in African nations is something that you would not believe as you do the research. So I found this story about Nigeria, very recent article. I'll read it to you guys because I'm all about giving out information. This was an article that came out last month from the Ghana, one of Ghana's largest newspapers. 994 Nigerians deported from Ghana in 18 months. The federal government of Nigeria has said 994 Nigerians have been deported from Ghana through the land borders in the last 18 months. The chairman, Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Mr. Abiki Dabiri, explained that 508 Nigerians were deported within the last 6 months, while 486 were repatriated in 2018. She says that she cautioned that the continent would suffer should Nigeria treat other nationals in the same manner. So that, I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat for you guys. I'm not going to read the whole thing for you, but if you want to read it, go right ahead. But Nigeria and Ghana have an extremely tense relationship right now, extremely tense. Okay, so Ghana is telling them to get out, Nigerians telling them to get out, and this is one of the problems of disunity, right? See, one of the things that I admire about the American political system and the way that they organize themselves since they passed the U.S. Constitution is the fact that back at the time when after they had won their freedom from Great Britain, there were many of the Southern planters that wanted to create a 3-state confederation, right? So we all know that there were 13 states that defeated Great Britain. But what a lot of people are not aware of is that the idea of a U.S. Constitution was something that a lot of what they called the anti-federalists at that time did not want. They felt that the interest of the northern states versus what they call the middle states, which would have been like Maryland and North Carolina, South Carolina versus the deep southern states, they had different agendas, different systems of commerce, different goals. So they wanted disunity. They wanted to create like a 3-state federation called the Northern, Middle, and Southern Leagues. But because there was a document that preceded the U.S. Constitution called the Articles of Confederation, those like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and John Jay realized that to allow a Confederate League would have been detrimental to the future of even the Confederates themselves, because based on their economy, they would develop different relationships with different European nations. And then that was going to cause problems. So they had made the decision that we must be a unified front, and we will give a system of federalism, but it will be subordinate to the federal system. So that's how we got our U.S. Constitution. This could have been a whole different situation. America could have been Europe, because that's what a lot of the anti-federalists wanted. They didn't want a unified country. They wanted a confederacy. So you would have had the southern states having their own confederacy, the middle states having their own confederacy, the northern states having their own confederacy. This would have caused problems for taxation, raising revenue, signing treaties, and that's just international. Think about the issues that would have been between the countries themselves, like these confederacies themselves, as they tried to expand. So remember, there were only 13 states originally. So as they expanded west, can you imagine the kind of conflicts and mini wars and multiple civil wars that would have been had as different? The Northern Confederacy says, well, you know, the Ohio is my state. Then the middle state says, no, it's our natural neighbor. So we would have probably destroyed the country if we would have been disunit. So Africa is in a similar continental situation where they would have their strongest power in unity if they could create a federalist system. But because of the miniature wars that they have going on within their own borders with tribes, and then within the nation themselves, they just can't get it together as a unit group. So then they want to throw the xenophobic tag on Black Americans. Are you serious? See, that lets me know that you guys think that we're dumb, that we don't have the capacity to go do the research on your own domestic political situation, that we don't have the capacity to question if what Donald Trump said is true. Well, I'm going to join Donald Trump and say what he said is true. There's no benefit to the majority of Americans doing foreign aid. So now that I've given you an idea of the actual relationship between some of these African nations with each other and how bad it really is, now let's dig into the foreign aid piece. So let me just take a break and look in the chat real quick. So let me bring Mike's comment up. I absolutely disagree with him on this. So I'll bring that up. I absolutely disagree with you, Mike, because I'm 8OS and I just gave you the information. You can't say that 8OS doesn't have a game plan if I'm 8OS and I'm giving you a game plan right now. I've been talking about a game plan the whole time. And I can go deeper into my own personal political agenda a little bit later as well. I have like a 20-point political plan. But the reparations thing just happened to be the most important issue because it's a massive cash infusion. So that's very critical. And that's why I support that. So yeah, I would agree with Mike on that point though. That is the number one point. but I disagree with him in that there is no game plan. It's a developing game plan. Shout out to Albert Berg. And like I said, so you got guys like Mike V. They have become very comfortable with the fact that Black Americans have been discombobulated and all over the place with their own Black agenda. So I do agree that there was a time that was happening, but I disagree with Mike V on the fact that I think that you have a sleeping giant waking up, and only time will tell. Only time will tell if Mike V is correct or I'm correct. But as a centrist, I disagree with Mike V. But I do understand where he's coming from. It would seem to be that, for the last 60 years, as an outsider, you would consider that Black Americans have not had a united game plan. But I think that the 2020 and 2024 election is going to disprove you. 2016 already kind of disproved that because Black men were already fleeing the democratic way of life. So let me continue. Let me see some other comments in here. What's up, Mr. Fantastic? Truth as you know it. Let me go ahead and bring up Truth's comment. Okay, so let's get back to the foreign aid piece. This is where it gets very interesting for me, man, because now that we have Donald Trump telling us that, all this foreign aid to these countries is a waste of money and it should be reinvested in America, I totally agree with him. We have a decaying infrastructure in America that just fixing the infrastructure in America that's like 75 years old would be a massive job creation policy and would put a lot of Black men to work. But more importantly, it would put them back to getting government paid training in the things that would be necessary to upgrade the infrastructure of America. That's just one example. But so yeah, with the foreign aid thing, looking at some of the countries, like I was looking at Ethiopia, for example, in the database, and it showed that Ethiopia receives about $1 to $2 billion per year from the United States in the form of foreign aid welfare. I think, what was Nigeria? I don't have the numbers right in front right now, but I remember Nigeria was like $500 million. Liberia, like about 215 billion to 230 billion, depending on the year. But so that's just kind of an example. Haiti, Jamaica, I think Haiti received about 500 million, something like that. Jamaica, I think about 70 million. I'm just going off my memory right now. Let me see if I could. It's funny, like I'm here doing a live, and Mr. Research, he just invited me to his live, and I tried to invite him to my live, so that's unfortunate because I did want him to come on. He's big on the ADOS lineage movement. So let me see. I'm gonna bring up the database, so I'm not giving you guys the wrong numbers. But if anyone has a question about a certain country, please enter that country in the chat so I can see it, and I will enter it into the database and give you the numbers for this year in foreign aid. So if you have a certain question about a certain country, let me know. I can look it up right now. I got the database up. So let's go back to, I don't want to misquote on Nigeria, so let me go look at Nigeria again. So Nigeria receives 850 million. So I was actually lowballing. They receive between 850 to $1 billion every year in foreign aid welfare. So let's look at Ghana, since I was talking about Ghana earlier. Let's look at Ghana. Ghana receives about 184 to 200 million in foreign aid welfare. There's a specific reason why I'm bringing up this foreign aid welfare, and it'll make sense in a moment. But I just want to give you guys an opportunity to ask about any country before I like close the database. So if you have a question, if you want to know the numbers of a certain country, please put it in the chat before I pull down the database and go into depth of why I'm bringing it up. So let's look at Haiti, because these are more countries that are familiar to Black Americans. So Haiti receives about 300 to 320 million each year in foreign aid welfare. That's Haiti. Let's look at Jamaica. Jamaica receives between 40 and 50 million each year. So let's be frank. You want to know about India? I want to be clear on that. Is it India that you want to know about? So I can look that up as well. So LBF says he wants to know about India. So India receives about 100 to 105 million each year, which is kind of surprising because they're such a large nation. I would have expected that they receive more, but they actually receive about 105 million each year, India. Yes, Mr. Fantastic, I'm speaking strictly about U.S. foreign aid because I want to keep this about ADOS and the Black diasporan conflict here. Canada, the European nations, they give their own aid, but I'm just looking at the U.S. database because I want to keep this about what's going on between ADOS lineage movement versus the Black diasporans, because I want to resolve this issue by putting this information out there so that they will understand that I don't want a battle with my brothers and sisters from the diaspora. I don't, because I think that they enrich our experience when we deal with each other on an honest and a mutual beneficial level, right? So I think that Black diasporans they potentially enrich fully our experience as ADOS. So it's more important that we mend our relationship and that we correct misunderstandings now versus allowing the greater society to manipulate both groups for their own benefit, because ultimately the dominant society is going to do what's best for their goals. And if they feel that they can throw the segment of Black diasporans under the bus right now, where it's going to cost them later, they'll do that with no problem because they've been doing it to us forever. So that's where I stand on it. And so this information will be put out there so that this will give Black diasporans, many of them probably don't know what's going on, but many of them do though. And I'm going to get to that part because they're very, very deceptive, a lot of these Black diasporans, and that's why it has to be called out. So let's check out the Congo. The brother Trey Waters wants to talk about the Congo. So let's see what they're getting from the U.S. taxpayer. So Congo is split into two nations now. They used to be considered one nation, but now they're split into two nations called Congo Brazzaville and Congo Kinshasa. So I have to give you both numbers. So the Congo Brazzaville receives about 35 to 40 million each year. And the Congo Kinshasa, wow, now that's interesting. Congo Kinshasa receives about 500 million. That's interesting. So just looking at the numbers, that lets me know the kind of interest that the U.S. has in Congo Kinshasa and the kind of strategic position that they must have, because they're getting about $500 million from the U.S. government taxpayers every year. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this database. Okay, so someone says South Africa, Tony Smith, let's look that up. South Africa. Give me 1 second. So when we talk about South Africa is in the $500 million club as well. They get about 500 to 510 million every year in U.S. foreign aid welfare. But I think the biggest recipient was Israel. Israel receives $3 to $4 billion a year in foreign aid welfare. So that lets you know where Donald Trump truly stands on the relationship with Israel, because for him to say that foreign aid does nothing for America, I mean, this is where we're at in America right now, man. This is where we're at. America is looking to take care of its own people rather than other countries. And I think that's how it should be, because those other countries are taking care of their own interest as well. And some of these other nations have some of the strictest immigration policies you could ever imagine. You know, that's the thing that's so funny about it. Everyone is calling the United States so xenophobic, But many of these nations are much more xenophobic than the United States and its citizens, specifically Mexico, for example. Mexico can't stand Guatemala, can't stand them. They don't want to talk about that, though. Mexico don't want to talk about the fact that they can't stand Guatemala and they're trying to build a wall on their southern border. A lot of people don't know that. That's one of the reasons why they encourage their citizens to come to America, work, and remit their money back to Mexico. And I can't blame them. That's smart to do that. That's smart to have your people come here illegally, get their money, remit it back to Mexico so Mexico can do some of the things that they want to do as far as like creating a wall on their southern border. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that Mexico wants to build a wall on their southern border to keep the Guatemalans, the Hondurans, and those that are south of them out of their own country. But yet they will come on TV and virtue signal to the United States, don't build a border. See, this is what I mean by political science. And that's why these spaces are so great, because it gives us an opportunity to educate ourselves. We are all ignorant of so many things. And by having these conversations, it forces us to become more knowledgeable about the topics that, you know, impact our lives. So that's the foreign aid. I'm not going to go in the database, but basically it's about 50 to 60 billion a year that goes out overall, and about 20 billion that goes to the Black diasporan countries. So the reason I want to give you guys that background was because what they don't tell you is that there's a very, very popular, okay, I'll do this last one for Trey Waters, Dominican Republic. That'll be my last one from the database. And I'm gonna dig into the conversation. So let's see what they get in the Dominican, because that's a very small country, so it can't be too much. So they get about 60 to 65 million a year from the United States, Dominican Republic, which is pretty good because they're so small. They're one of the small nations. So the reason I brought this up, because there's a book that I would recommend that all of you guys that want to understand how foreign aid works. And it's funny because Trump made this comment this year, but there's a Zambian woman by the name of Dambisa Moyo. She's an economist and a Goldman Sachs trained financier. She wrote a book 10 years ago called Did Aid? Why Aid is Not Working and How There is a Better Way for Africa. I'll put that link in the chat for you guys. Probably can get the book for $1 or $2 on Amazon. But this is the perspective from a Zambian economist, and she really goes into detail about like kleptocracy and how foreign aid is a waste and how it actually keeps those nations in a dependent relationship. I had a chance to read that book a couple years back. Someone had recommended it to me, and it was funny that this came up because Trump was talking about it. And I'm like, wow, okay, so Trump is saying what no other politician has had the courage and fortitude to say. And that's why Dambisa Moyo had written that book back then, because she was saying that it was actually the welfare being received by the G20 countries that was keeping the African nations in a dependent relationship, which we have our own version of that when we talk about how welfare tends to keep the lower classes in a state of dependency. So she just took it to the macro level, but we're familiar with that on a micro level. So if you know, for anyone that may have read the book, you're familiar with her argument. You know, she talked about how you're pumping all these trillions and trillions of dollars into these nations since the end of World War II, but the situation is getting worse and worse and worse in that country. And there's a reason for that. She lays it out in her book very well. This is what the Black diasporans don't want you to know. A lot of your Black diasporans and a lot of the most outspoken ones, the foreign aid that comes from the United States taxpayers goes to ruling parties in each one of those nations. Now, I gave you guys some numbers of those nations so you can start to do your own thought experiment. You got a nation like Ethiopia getting $1 billion to $2 billion a year from U.S. taxpayers. But it doesn't go to the Ethiopian people. It doesn't go to the Nigerian people. It doesn't go to the South African people, the Israeli people. It goes to the ruling party and the ruling class of those countries. Foreign welfare out of the pockets of hardworking U.S. taxpayers. You're sending welfare checks to the ruling parties of these nations. Now, this is where it gets deep as you read Dambisa's book. These ruling parties control all the administrations of aid or whatnot in these countries. But they also have families. They also have extended families. They also have tribes and clans, different sects within there. So the ruling clans get this money. They keep it to themselves for the most part. Only a superficial amount of it goes to the people to put up a good front. Now, this is in Dambisa Moyo's book. I put it in the link. Trump said it himself. But here's where it gets deep from the standpoint of the ADOS lineage movement versus the diaspora. So you got these people receiving these checks from U.S. taxpayers, people like you and me. And we complain about our own people here receiving welfare checks. Why should I complain about the single mother getting a welfare check or the white trash getting a welfare check when we're sending welfare checks to all these other countries? If it's good for them, it should definitely be good for our own American people. You can't dispute that. But for me, think about how deceptive it is. So these ruling parties and their cronies, their children, guess what? They don't invest that money back in their own country and building up their infrastructure like they should. They send their children to other countries. They spend the money on creating playgrounds like Dubai so they can use this foreign aid to just bang the best looking women on the planet and blow that shit. As long as they do what the G20 countries tell them, they'll keep sending them those checks. That's why they're angry at Trump, because Trump said, I'm tired of sending this money to you guys. It does nothing for us. We don't need your strategic input and no more. We got enough technology now to replace you. So the automation is also impacting foreign aid, because that's what Trump is saying. He's saying that because of their advancing in technology, they need these people less. So, of course, these diasporans are going to fight back against that because they've been getting a good ride. Now, think about this from the standpoint of the ADOS Black American. Our grandfathers and great-grandparents fought for all these pathways to be opened up so that their grandchildren could get access to corporations, get access to business loans, grants, scholarships, and all these different seats. But because what I said earlier, the boomer generation and older Gen Xers didn't really hold the line on that, these programs since the 80s became overwhelmed by white feminists and foreign blacks. This is facts. Now, remember what I said earlier. Think about the disrespect to have someone getting a welfare check from you back in their country. So let's take Nigeria, for example, right? So you got Nigeria and Ghana. They're at war with each other. So they're at war with each other. But those same people are all up in the digital space calling us xenophobic, right? But they're taking the checks from taxpayers, giving it to their children so they can live like kings and queens, and then sending their children to American universities in seats that would have went to Black Americans, because they don't go by the race of being a foreigner. There's no designation foreigner. Their designation is Black. So a scholarship that might have went to your child will go to them because they're Black. They also get to go to the elitist universities over there because they're getting your dollar to attend private schools taught by G20 missionaries, taught by G20 emissaries. They don't tell you about that. And I'll use an example. Here's an example. So let's talk about Pan-Africanism. The so-called Prince of Pan-Africanism. He should slap himself, because whatever his whole thing is with his school, I'm not a supporter, I don't care. But the idea of Black men creating these schools, right? Now, Oprah Winfrey created a school and she took it over to Africa. To me, that's Pan-Africanism. She created a school with American dollars and her money in Africa. That's Pan-Africanism. But I don't see none of these Africans and these Caribbeans coming to Black people and saying, we want to reinvest some of the money that was given to us by the United States into some of the institutions that you all are trying to create over there. So you got Umar Johnson, I'm the Prince of Pan-Africanism. I don't see those people over there His school isn't built yet, or if it is built, I ain't heard about it. But I know it wasn't built when I checked in a year or so ago. So I'm just using it as that Oprah and Umar Johnson thing as an example, because all of the Pan-Africanism has been a one-way street. And I've already given you guys the information. It's been a one-way street. Black Americans are to be the black carpet and the footstool for other groups that get to come over here and get all the benefits of all the work of Black American generations without any other cost at all, because they're on an escalator straight to private schools in their country funded by US taxpayers and other G20 countries. Top seats in the universities here because of their connections that they get through their wealth, that much of it comes from the US taxpayers and other G20 countries. But then that also gets them into the top corporation. That's why many of your black talking heads on television right now, I didn't know until the last couple of years that a lot of these are not Black American ADOS people. It was only because of this conflict that I had to start looking deeper into it myself, and come to find out most of these people are not Black American descendants of slaves. They got their positions because of the privilege that they've garnered from us. And I can back everything I'm saying up with facts. Everything I've provided you guys is facts so far. And I want you to prove to me that it's not a one-way street. I don't see them making a big deal out of giving dual citizenship to Black American top quarter class people. I don't see them making a big deal out of giving us affirmative action to their universities. I don't see them coming over here and recruiting us. I see Black American Hotep communists going out of their way to reach out to Black diasporans, going out of their way to do it, making themselves look like fools because the person that you're reaching out to is laughing at you. Where is all this exchange? I want to know. Maybe I'm unaware of it, but I don't see it. I don't see no big campaigns to bring us over there. I don't see any big campaigns to do like college exchange with our top students. Why aren't our top 20% of student scores on the SAT and ACT being invited to go to all these 32 to 54 nation universities with foreign aid stipends from them to us? Have you heard about it? Nah, I doubt it. You haven't heard about it. So let me move on. So yeah, I guess my question to the audience, and I'm gonna go ahead and type it up real quick. So I'm gonna type up the question to the audience, and I'm gonna see if anyone wants to come on for an hour, because I'm not even supposed to be doing this, man. I've been having a nice August vacation, but man, I had to have this conversation and give my opinion on this, man. So I want to know, like, why Black Americans should support the $22 billion that's going to these elite Black diasporans who come over here, get preferential treatment above Black Americans, but get all the benefits of being labeled as Black Americans, and then have the audacity to come up with terms like akata, which means cotton picker or low class, undesirable among West African peoples. They use this term about us. So I'm you know what? Hey, you guys can use these terms to denigrate us or whatever. But like I said, man, there's a lot of Black American dudes that is not in that Hotep communist world that's waking up to their own self-interest. And they're gonna, you know, it only takes 5 to 7% of a population to cause a revolution in thinking. Let's not think that it takes every person, rank and file person. The rank and file person is uninformed, uninterested, disinterested, but they will follow behind those that they designate as being their leaders. The civil rights movement, 100% of Blacks wasn't on that shit. Matter of fact, I had a conversation with Judge Joe Brown on social media, and he was really opposed to the civil rights movement's tactics of turning the other cheek, getting bricks knocked upside your head and getting hosed down. He said he wasn't with that. He was more of a militant. So there were some that took the militant way, like the Eldridge Cleavers, the Black Panthers, Bobby Newton, Stokely Carmichael, H.P. Brown, and a whole slew of Black dudes that was like, nah, we ain't with this turn the other cheek Buddhist shit. We gonna fight fire with fire. So what I did learn from that is that it only takes like 5 to 7% of a population to lead the other 90 to 95% or whatever. So just keep that in mind. And that was true even before the internet. Now, I'm actually convinced it only takes 1% of the population of a certain group to wake up to spread the message, because of the way that 6 degrees of separation has always worked. And maybe we need to even change the term from 6 degrees of separation. Maybe it's more like 20 degrees of separation now in this fourth industrial age. Shout out to Ulysses. He was the person that really woke me up to studying the fourth industrial age. So this is the question I got. And I'm going to post it up. And then if there's anyone that wants to join me for an hour, I'll be glad to like continue this conversation with you. To hear what you guys' opinion is. I pretty much said what I have to say about it. But I think that it's very important that we just be honest with each other. You know, Black people, we've been having a one-way relationship with this so-called Pan-Africanism. I call it stoolism. That's the more proper word for it. Footstoolism. That's what I'm going to call it moving forward. Because until the Black diasporans themselves listen to what I've said, disprove everything that I'm saying, or come up with a give me the examples of how I'm wrong. Because based on all the evidence that I've given you, I have the President of the United States and his whole cabinet backing me. I have more than half of the country backing what I'm saying. So that you got a hell of a mountain to overcome if you're going to disprove what I'm saying. But you might have some information I don't have. But I think the piece about how they spend the money with their ruling parties and their families and their friends, that part has to be really seriously investigated, because that's not really my topic. My narrative is all about fixed by exit. And I'm all about giving free-thinking Black men information that they need to see if it applies to their life. Because as I tell people all the time, I'm an individual and I'm focused on my individual self, but my rational self-interest will always make me lean towards what is going to be in that interest. And that has group elements sometimes. So I try to spread information that brothers can use, and they can make their own decision on how they want to use that information. But I think that for you research-oriented guys, that it would do you justice to go look into African kleptocracy over the last, let's just take 100 years, because I like to have a panoramic view of things. So I always try to go back to a certain, I'll go back 50 years, 100 years, and then I just kind of work backwards. But go study African kleptocracy, foreign aid, and how these people are enriching themselves at the expense of their own populations, how they're warring with each other at the expense of the United Front of Africa. But then they call us xenophobic, but yet they're xenophobes to each other and xenophobes towards us. And why is it that I, as a Black American ADOS, should support $22 billion of foreign welfare aid going to you? Why shouldn't I stand with Donald Trump and the other people that are saying spend that money on American concerns? Why should that $22 billion not go to solving the issue of Black male homelessness? That's a question I will pose to the audience. Someone in the audience tell me, why should that $22 billion not go to an army of Black psychologists, an army of Black social workers, and an army of Black nonprofit-oriented individuals to help get our Black veterans off the streets, to help get our Black boys off the streets, to help get our Black men going through divorce that zeroed them out off the streets? Someone explain to me why we shouldn't be using that $22 billion to solve the Black male homelessness problem, just one issue alone. Why shouldn't it be going to getting those Black men off the street of San Francisco, shitting on the streets? Why shouldn't that $22 billion be going to those Black guys on Skid Row? Why shouldn't that Black man that's sitting there in New York City fighting with rats for a castaway subway, why shouldn't it go to figuring out the mental illness issues impacting Black American men? And I'm just sticking to one topic, just the homelessness issue itself. Why? Why shouldn't it go to training these Black men on the streets for the jobs of the future and the jobs that are currently needed? Give me 10 reasons why, because I've given you 10 reasons already tonight why it should not go to those countries, and why Black men themselves should stand with those that say, take care of Americans first. Those $22 billion, because Trump said it ain't doing no use for the country anyway. So if it's doing no use for the country, this foreign aid, why should we support it going to those nations? I say I don't support it. It should go to Americans first. And the immigration policy in America should reflect the needs of the American economy from a legal, vetted immigration standpoint. I support immigration. Immigration is good because there's certain sectors of jobs that really have a high demand that we're too behind on the education, and we have to catch up. That's facts. Those people should be heavily vetted and brought in, but not as a preferential pass above our own citizens. The whole entire school system needs to be reformed to reflect the needs of the fourth industrial age. So there's so many problems that America has in terms of infrastructure, in terms of our decaying institutions in this country. There's a lot of money that needs to be reinvested in this country itself, man. So I'm looking for some responses to why Black American ADOS should support the $22 billion in foreign welfare to Black diaspora nations each year. I'm looking for some responses. And I'm also looking for some evidence of how this Pan-Africanism has been two-way street, because I'm saying it's been a one-way street. And I want to see, you guys that think it's a two-way street, give me the evidence so I can look it up, and then I will come back and do a later show in the next month sometime, because this isn't my topic. I wasn't even planning on doing this. It's just that the conversation between Edward Anderson and Mike V brought it to this space. So I thought I would just give my 2 cents on it based on my own personal research. You guys may do some research that refutes everything I'm saying. And please do feel free to send it to me. But based on what I'm seeing now, if there's no benefit to the United States, there's definitely no benefit to the Black American rank and file. No benefit that I could see of. Put that money back into America. Put that money back into Black American educated classes, the business class, and those that are trying to use the money to like reform. Put that into the hands of people that are like the Idmores, the SYBM bros. Put it in the hand of the Hotep communists that actually do want to create their own cities. I'm not against that, even though I'm not a part of the Hotep communist thing, and I don't want to be living in their cities. But there are those that want to create their own Black towns. They want to create their own Black counties. And I support that because they have the right to do that. If they want to get together with other men and women, create an arranged marriage situation where they intermarriage with each other, a Jack and Jill, fraternity, sorority kind of thing, taken to a expanded level and create their own Black jurisdictions, more power to them. But they are Native American here. And so I want to see that money go to those people. This is my opinion on this. So we've already debunked the xenophobe thing because the way that xenophobe is used is incorrect. The actual definition says that it's about possible danger. And the possible danger that many Black Americans in the aggregate feel is that they're in danger of being erased. Not for their benefit, but to their cost and to their possible political extinction. That is a valid argument, because it's coming from the majority. I'm not worried about being erased because I have the skills. I understand how to have multiple bank accounts, and I understand how to get the information I need to move around. But the majority feel that way, and they have the absolute right in this country to feel that way and to organize themselves for their benefit. So I'm not seeing any counterpoints coming in. Let me check back with Mr. Research one moment and see what's going on with him, because I know he was trying to do his own hangout. Bad timing. I really wanted him on. Was there anything in the database information I shared with you guys that amounts that these countries received that stood out to you? Any of the information that might have stood out in your mind in regards to this conversation? Because I'm definitely looking for a counter, information so I can, readjust what I said tonight. Okay, so let me go back and read some of these comments. Truth as I know it, he says, evangelicals only say they love Israel because they want all the Jews to go back home so Jesus can come back. We have biblical prophecy shaping foreign policy. Crazy. Wow. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it from that angle. Thanks for that. World Bank and IMF Bank hold these countries hostage. Economic slavery, says G. Thorough McScrooge. Yeah, that's an argument that Dambisa Moyo made. So I put her book up in there. If you want to read that, definitely she agrees with you. Trey Waters says, thanks for educating us young black men like me. Your talking points are very insightful and needed. Keep up the great work, bro. I look up to you as a legend. Hey, man, I appreciate the love, but you know what? I look up to you, Trey. I don't want no one looking up to me because I look up to knowledge. I've never had any role model besides a couple uncles and my stepfather, but they were more like mentors. But I want you to look up to knowledge and logic. That's who I want you to look to, because that's how we all become great. So me, I appreciate it, man. That's wow. You know, that's very humbling. But I want you to look up to knowledge, and I want you to look up to logic and becoming a better critical thinker. Make that your mentor. Make that your legend and your hero. So Tony Smith says, Umar was supposed to open his school later this month, laughing out loud. Hey, I don't know. He may never open the school because to me, we're having school right. The black manosphere is school, as far as I'm concerned. You don't need 4 walls to have a school anymore. All you need is access to knowledge and an open mind to intake the knowledge and the time commitment to get it. That's it. That's school now in the new age. So we're doing school. We've done more to impact the black mind in the black male YouTube space than Umar Johnson has done in 10 years of raising whatever amount of money he's raised. So just think about that. So G. Thorough says that Joy Reid is the perfect example of one of these people. And I guess he's referring to the escalator to success that I mentioned in regards to how black people are not getting the benefits, but these immigrants are getting all the benefits of the efforts of our ancestors. So I agree with him on that. And remember, I'm a person that talks about fixed by exit. I believe that the vast majority of blacks have been overtaken by a black redneck culture that really went into fast forward mode over the last 40 years. And I want nothing to do with that culture. I'm creating my own culture. And for brothers that are not that familiar with me, you know, when I talk about fixed by exit, I'm a person that I've always been a fan since I came to this space of the brothers that say, you know, save yourself, black man. And one of the things that I've talked about is, you know, when I say fixed by exit, I'm talking about every man having his own code. But for me, the code that I'm operating on for the next 24 months is all about paying off my debts, lowering my expenses and embracing minimalism, increasing my savings and expanding my savings account across different multinational banks, renewing my passport, focusing on the pursuit of my happiness, and having a $10,000 emergency fund. That's what I call fixed by exit. So when you guys hear me say hashtag fixed by exit, that's what I'm referring to, is what I'm doing for myself. If you guys find some of those points to be helpful to you, I recommend that you put it into use in your life. I'd like to hear in the comment section what kind of things that you guys are focused on this year and what your personal code of moving forward is for 2019 and 2020 outside of what we've talked about tonight. Because that's what's going to matter. You know, it's always at the micro level that we feel things. So what we're feeling individually first. So just kind of curious, are you guys waiting for the government to solve your problem, or how are you going about solving your own problems? Because that's what it boils down to. The government is there to do exchange, but you got to focus on solving your own problems with what you got. And then using the government to as a footstool. See, that's what the government should be used for by the population is as a footstool for your social mobility. So I'll read a couple more questions before I close this out. I really enjoyed having this conversation. I'm sure that someone will come across this and they will attack me as a, as some kind of xenophobe, but I'm comfortable with that because I think that I've made my case that they are just gaslighting and misusing the term for those that have a healthy awareness of how foreign policy and foreigners impact our reality here in the United States. So let me read a couple more. So Mark King, I agree that reparations should be paid to blacks whose ancestors were enslaved, but we must be careful not to separate blacks into groups such as African American ADOS. We are just blacks. The biggest problem blacks face is that we don't work together as one group. Other groups come to the US and are successful because they work together. Divided we fall. I actually 100% agree with you that it shouldn't be that way, that we shouldn't have to make this separation. But based on the case that I've presented, I feel that this is the situation that Black Americans that are the descendant of slaves have been put in. And it's only temporary. So keep that in mind. This conflict between the ADOS blacks and the Black diasporans, it's temporary, I hope. But I've got to be honest with you. Black Americans have been going it alone this whole time. So let's just be honest. Like I said, Pan-Africanism has mostly been a small group of the guys and women that have thought like that. For the most part, most of the Pan-Africans haven't reached out to us like that. They haven't really given too much about our outcomes. So let's just be honest about that. And that's historically speaking. There's your exceptions, but they are the exception that proves the rule as far as I'm concerned. So I think this is temporary because this has to be done in order for Black Americans to make it clear that we have a developing agenda that relates to getting this cash infusion and potentially tax exemption and potentially free college, free healthcare, and whatnot. So those Black Americans that have the most to lose are going to fight the hardest. Me, if I don't get a reparation check, it won't affect my life at all. I'll just keep doing what I've been doing, winning. But if I was to get a check where they're talking about 100,000, 200,000, like I've said before, based on the way that I invest, I'll be a millionaire within 3 years of receiving that check, no question. So that's how I'm looking at it. So you have this movement, and then you have these Black diasporans who are offering Black Americans nothing, getting in the way of that. That doesn't even make practical sense. You'd have to think that your opponent is an absolute retard, that they wouldn't be able to see right through that. So you got on one hand the possibility of a cash infusion, tax exemption, and these different kind of outcomes versus you offering nothing but I'll say that I'm Black. Get out of here. Because we have 40, 50 years of history that proves that you only use that Blackness for your own benefit and to bring your own group into greater power. So I have to disagree with Mark King on that part, but I do know where he's going. And he's 100% correct that united, we're much stronger if the Black diasporans that came over here would come in a view of brotherhood and sisterhood and say that we're never going to put ourselves opposed to the ADOS people. We're always going to stand with them, or we're going to stand outside of any of their comments. We don't even care if you're just indifferent. Just stand and get out the way. That's what I'm saying. Get out the way, because this fight has nothing to do with you. So they have to make the decision on their own. But I'm not going to beg Black diasporans to support anything that Black ADOS do, because we don't need them. Our numbers are far superior to theirs. They have between 4 and 5 million, and we have between 37 and potentially 39 million, because the new data hasn't come out. So we don't need them. They need us if they want to stay here in the United States and continue to cloak themselves in the Black flag and in Blackness. So that's just the facts. So let me see if there's any other questions. So Mark King says, I do not support the American administration giving billions overseas, but the American government don't do it for free. That's true. But now the American government under Trump is saying that they don't need those groups for strategic reasons anymore because of automation and different technology they have now, and the way that modern warfare is compared to warfare prior to the fourth industrial age. So that's why Trump came out and said that. So Richard Victor Dixon, I'll bring your comment up on the screen, and I will make yours the last comment, because that's an interesting statement. Truly fixing by exit is leaving the American system entirely, only act as a leech, taking blood, dollars, and resources elsewhere for one's benefit, aggregating to a more empowered collective. I mean, that's an interesting comment. I disagree, because I think that the first exit that Black men like myself should do is an exit from Black redneck culture. So I'm talking more about an exit that starts in the mind first, because there's a war for your mind in society and the kind of ideologies that they can plant in your head. So when I say fixed by exit, I mean a rejection of historical racial stereotypes of the Black male, rejection of Black redneck culture, and a rejection of a non-competitive culture. So that's what I mean by fixed by exit. The first exit starts in your mind, exiting from regressive thinking, exit from non-competitive behaviors, exit from destroying your own image. But from a larger long-term outlook, I agree with Richard Victor Dixon. It probably will end up coming to that. But like I said, you're not going to get to that point outside of these American borders unless we fix the relationship in the Black diaspora. We wouldn't even be having these conversations if that relationship was strong like it's supposed to be. We're having these conversations because it's a one-way street that needs to be going to two ways. And then we can get that reality that Victor is talking about. But until that relationship is really understood, and until we're honest about that relationship, it ain't happening, man. I'm sorry. It only happened for individuals. It only happened for a small percentage, which I'm in that small percentage. Like I said when I started this stream, I've always had a good relationship with my Black diasporan people, because I come at them from a standpoint of a free-thinking Black man, unashamed, unabashed with it. I don't want to be anything but a Black man. That's all I ever want to be. A successful, free-thinking, healthy Black man with loving and happy relationships with other people. That's all I want in life. And I'm good. So let me do this final check of the comments. So does anyone want the link to come on for a few moments? It looks like Mr. Research got his own stream going on, so he's not going to be able to join me. But I'm sure that he'll do a follow-up, because he has a lot to say about this conversation. So this is your last chance to come on and speak your piece on record. All right. Well, I appreciate you brothers coming through. I'm going to go ahead and close out this stream. This was my first StreamYard live cast. I really, really sincerely appreciate you brothers supporting me, because as you know, I've only been doing this since June, and it's something that I'm just kind of just learning, trial by fire type of thing. So I'm going to continue to increase my skill set in hosting these live casts. Eventually, this fall, I'll start just doing uploads, and I won't be doing live casts as often. I'll kind of do live cast as a response to uploads that I will do, but I have quite a bit of software training that I have to undergo over the next few months. So I'll just do live casts here and there, more in the response to other people than my own topics, because I kind of have a schedule of topics for the next 6 months that I can talk about, but I want to do that more as uploads, then a live cast conversation. So anyways, thank all of you all for coming out. You guys are great. It's just amazing that you support people like me that are new to this space and the conversation that we're trying to have. I just really appreciate it. And I hope that you all have a good, chill weekend. And this is King Sigma signing off. Peace.